Aqaba finger of the Red Sea, the believed place where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea.
The Red Sea has finally given up its secrets. After decades of mystery and skepticism, the waters have receded, and what was once thought to be legend is now coming into focus. That's right. Chariot wheels, unmistakably ancient, have been uncovered in the very place where the Exodus story said they would be. It's a discovery that could rewrite history as we know it. What does this mean for the biblical narrative? Buckle up, because what we're about to dive into is nothing short of groundbreaking. A team operating under the radar. In late 2024, a small team of professional salvage divers and marine technology experts arrived in Aqaba, Jordan. They weren't interested in gold, sunken ships, or forgotten trade routes. Their mission was far more controversial. They were searching for evidence of an ancient event described in the Bible. They believed the bottom of the Red Sea near Nuweiba Beach, on Egypt's side of the Gulf of Aqaba, might hold something extraordinary. Nearly 5 decades earlier, a man named Wyatt had made a bold claim. He said he found the remains of Pharaoh's army on the seabed, specifically chariot wheels. The idea was instantly dismissed by scholars and archaeologists. Many called it a hoax. But this team wasn't ready to walk away from the mystery. They were there to verify what Wyatt claimed. The group was a mix of marine engineers, ex-military divers, and underwater archaeologists. Some used their real names, others didn't. The operation stayed quiet on purpose. There was no press, no official announcement, and no backing from academic institutions. Their equipment was as advanced as it gets: sonar scanners, drones with high-resolution cameras, and submersibles capable of detecting even the smallest changes in sediment. But even with top-tier tech, getting this mission off the ground wasn't easy. Every attempt to gain support from government archaeologists had failed. Some officials even laughed them out of the room. One Israeli antiquities official reportedly dismissed them entirely, saying they'd find nothing but coral and wild theories. Worse still, regional governments began quietly pushing back. They cited environmental laws and marine protection acts. Behind the polite words, though, the message was clear: stop digging. Still, the team refused to back down. When traditional funding collapsed, a handful of wealthy private donors stepped in. These were people who had followed Wyatt's story for years. Some were simply curious. Others saw this mission as proof of their faith. With money in hand and tech ready to deploy, the group headed out into the Red Sea. They weren't sure what they would find, but what they discovered changed everything. When the divers finally reached the target site, they didn't expect much at first. But then, scattered across the seabed, they found something unusual. Dozens of objects shaped like wheels. They weren't flat or polished. In fact, they were rough and uneven. But they were clearly circular, with dimensions that looked eerily similar to ancient Egyptian chariot wheels. One diver later explained that they weren't smooth or perfect, but there was something oddly beautiful about them. Some were buried partially in coral. Others were almost entirely exposed, and they were everywhere. It didn't look random. It looked like something or someone had once tried to cross the seabed and failed.
For many years, it was believed that the Israelites crossed the Gulf of the Suez finger of the Red Sea.
To most scholars, the biblical account of the Red Sea crossing is just a story. But to these divers, the seabed told a different version. One where something massive and fast-moving was suddenly stopped. And this wasn't just about belief. It was about physical evidence, strange objects, in the exact spot where Wyatt claimed he had seen them decades earlier. The divers took photos, scanned sediment layers, and analyzed materials. And while official institutions continued to reject the idea, the team believes something important happened in that part of the sea. They didn't say it was a miracle, but they were convinced it wasn't just coral. back to where the Pharaoh fell. They kept it quiet. No press conferences, no crowdfunding campaigns, no attention at all. The operation was funded privately, behind closed doors, with every detail wrapped in silence. After months of planning, permits were finally approved. Equipment shipped in discreet crates, and the team prepared to descend into a place many experts had written off as pure legend. But silence doesn't last long online. Before the crew even reached the water, a single photo leaked. A blurry shot of their vessel floating in the Gulf of Aqaba. Someone posted it with a simple caption, "Back to where the Pharaoh fell." That was enough. The photo spread fast. Forums caught on, then conspiracy accounts, and before long, mainstream headlines started asking questions. People weren't just talking about the mission, they were talking about Wyatt again. A name that had been mostly mocked in academic circles suddenly became relevant. YouTube videos resurfaced, Reddit threads exploded, and even news anchors joined the conversation. One of the loudest voices came from Greg Gutfeld. Known for his sarcasm and distrust of official narratives, Gutfeld used his platform to spotlight the mission. On a live segment, he said that if these divers really found chariot wheels buried in the Red Sea, then high school history books might need a refund. The comment drew laughs, but it also sparked a debate. Was this another case of religious fiction being blown out of proportion? Or were these divers about to uncover something real? The team had already disappeared beneath the water, far away from the noise above. Their goal wasn't to prove anything to the media. They were there to explore. And if the legends were true, they were about to find more than just coral. At the center of this entire mission was one ancient question: what really happened during the Exodus? It's one of the most dramatic moments in the Bible. According to Scripture, the Israelites were trapped. On one side, the Egyptian army. On the other, the deep waters of the Red Sea. Then the sea splits. Moses raises his staff. Walls of water rise. The Israelites walk through on dry ground, while the Egyptian chariots charge in behind them. But before they can catch up, the water crashes back down, swallowing them. This scene has been retold for generations. It's taught in religious schools, portrayed in movies, and repeated from pulpits across the world. Churches, mosques, and synagogues all reference it. It's not only a story, but the foundation of faith for millions. But outside religious circles, it's a mystery that still fuels heated debate. The Bible doesn't give GPS coordinates. Historians and archaeologists have tried to trace the route for centuries, but no one agrees on a definitive path. Some argue the event happened in the shallow marshes of the Nile Delta. Others say it was never meant to be taken literally. Some believe the crossing happened in the Gulf of Suez, but one of the most talked about and controversial theories places the event much farther east at a stretch of coastline called Nuweiba along the Gulf of Aqaba. Supporters of this theory don't rely on miracles alone. They look at geography. Nuweiba Beach is unusually wide and flat, large enough to accommodate a mass exodus, and just beneath the water lies something strange. An underwater ridge that connects the Sinai Peninsula to what is now Saudi Arabia. This natural land bridge, some argue, could have been the very path Moses and the Israelites used to escape the Egyptian army. But most mainstream scholars aren't convinced. The debate that never ends. Academic voices like Israel Finkelstein have a very different take. To them, the story of the Exodus was never meant to be historical. They believe it was written during the Babylonian exile as a way to create unity and national identity among the scattered people of Israel. In that context, the Red Sea miracle isn't about geography or ocean floors. It's about hope. From this perspective, the lack of physical evidence makes perfect sense. And that's where the biggest problem lies. There are no Hebrew camps, no preserved weapons, no obvious signs of Egyptian pursuit. Decades of searches have come up empty. These repeated disappointments have only pushed major institutions further away from even trying. Still, there are some who refuse to give up. The name Ron Wyatt always finds its way into this conversation. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a scholar. He was a nurse from Tennessee, trained in anesthetics, with no formal degree in archaeology. But he believed the Bible held real, physical truths, and he wanted to prove them. In the 1970s, he quietly left his medical career and began traveling the world to search for biblical artifacts. He didn't have big investors or official support. He raised money through friends, church groups, and small donations. His goal wasn't fame. He believed he was called to do it. Wyatt's journey took him to Turkey, where he claimed to have found Noah's Ark. Then to Saudi Arabia, where he believed he had found the real Mount Sinai, scorched, he said, by God's fire. But none of those claims stirred the kind of attention that came with his dive into the Red Sea. In 1978, Wyatt traveled to Nuweiba Beach, drawn by a mix of biblical text and geography. With minimal gear and little assistance, he dove into the Gulf of Aqaba, convinced that something waited beneath the waves. He later described finding coral-encrusted objects shaped like chariot wheels. Some had 4 spokes, others had 6 or even 8. He claimed to see human bones, femurs, skulls, some appearing crushed. He even mentioned a shining circular shape beneath the surface, which he believed could be a gold-plated wheel, preserved for thousands of years. To Wyatt, this wasn't coincidence. The underwater ridge, the beach's shape, the timing, all of it matched the biblical account. He was sure he had found the path of the Israelites, the very spot where the Red Sea parted. But despite the bold claims, there were problems. He never produced certified photographs. No major scientific body reviewed his findings. And although he spoke about artifacts, none were brought to the surface or independently verified. Still, his story spread. Some believed him instantly, others dismissed him completely. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ron Wyatt had managed to keep the debate alive. Ron Wyatt's claims not only stir controversy, they were outright rejected by most of the scientific community. Academic journals wanted nothing to do with him. Archaeological organizations denied him access. And when he did manage to present his findings, they were quickly dismissed for lacking scientific depth. His research was seen as too personal, too untested, and far too dependent on what he believed he had seen rather than what he could prove. His tools were simple, his methods were improvised, and his conclusions rarely passed even the most basic standards of peer review. Still, his story didn't disappear. Over the years, his name continued to float through small religious newsletters and Christian documentaries. His photographs, grainy and often unclear, were shared among believers who clung to his message. To critics, he was just a fan with wild theories. But to his followers, he was something else entirely. A man with divine purpose. But one problem kept coming up. If he truly found ancient chariot wheels and the remains of Pharaoh's drowned army, why weren't any of them brought up to the surface? Why wasn't any of it on display? That question became the center of an ongoing mystery. What lies beneath? Ron Wyatt always insisted that the Gulf of Aqaba was hiding something. Something real. Something ancient. He believed it held the scattered remains of Egypt's finest war machines, sunk during the pursuit of Moses and the Israelites. Coral-covered wheels, shattered skeletons, the lost army of Pharaoh. But nothing ever made it out of the water. No museums ever received artifacts. No scientific teams ever confirmed his finds. So why not bring one wheel up to settle the matter once and for all? Wyatt had an explanation. In fact, he had 4. According to him, The coral that had grown around the wheels had both preserved and imprisoned them. The wheels were still visible, but they were completely fused into the coral.
The robotic camera's survey revealed many shapes and objects familiar to Mueller, including coral formations with right angles.
They couldn't be touched without falling apart. Trying to remove one would turn it to dust. In his view, this was nature's version of a display case, a fragile one. He believed that removing these structures would not only destroy them, but erase their historical value. To him, they were better off untouched, safely hidden in the sea where they had rested for thousands of years. Pontian, one of the divers involved in the search, documented what he believed was the coral-encrusted outline of a wheel. Its shape and size, he claimed, matched what was known about ancient Egyptian chariot wheels. But identifying it was only half the battle. Removing it was something else entirely. The second challenge was fragility. According to Wyatt, the seabed didn't just bury these objects, it preserved them in a kind of natural tomb. Once exposed to the air, light, or even the human touch, they would likely fall apart. The coral wasn't just clinging to the wheel, it had become part of it. The ocean had turned these remains into fragile shadows of what they once were, and any attempt to retrieve them could destroy what little was left. The third obstacle wasn't physical, but political. The Gulf of Aqaba, where Wyatt made many of his claims, falls under Egyptian jurisdiction, and Egypt's laws on archaeology are strict. According to Wyatt, even documenting or talking about these underwater finds brought legal risks. Removing an artifact without official permission wasn't just discouraged, it was illegal. He said this made it nearly impossible to get formal recognition or allow public access to the evidence he believed he had found. The most dramatic part of Wyatt's account involved something far more mysterious. A wheel unlike the rest. He described it as being smooth, not covered in coral, and glowing as though it had been covered in gold. He claimed he had found this shimmering object on the sea floor, completely different from the other wheels, and that it might have belonged to a high-ranking Egyptian, possibly even Pharaoh himself. Instead of keeping it or showing it to the public, Wyatt said he turned it over to the Egyptian authorities. And that's where the trail goes cold. There are no official records of the object, no photos, no museum display, no statement from Egypt. To skeptics, this isn't just a red flag, it's a full stop. Without documentation, they argue, the golden wheel becomes just another story. A dramatic one, yes, but no more real than the myths it claims to support. Still, the story won't go away. It keeps resurfacing in niche publications, low-budget documentaries, and now in a new wave of underwater investigations. Because even without proof, the possibility that such a discovery could exist continues to attract people who want to believe. After decades of silence, new teams have returned to the same waters Wyatt once explored. But the question is, why now? What triggered this renewed interest in a decades-old claim that never gained acceptance in the mainstream? The answer may lie in the growing attention on biblical archaeology. In recent years, interest in historical evidence that connects to religious texts has seen a revival. New documentaries, online channels, and independent researchers are all digging into ancient landscapes with fresh determination. For them, it's not just about proving a story. It's about finding something concrete in a world full of speculation. Faith resurfaces underwater. From quiet rumors about Noah's Ark resting on Mount Ararat to bold claims that Mount Sinai isn't in Egypt, but deep within the Saudi desert, and whispers that the Ark of the Covenant might be hidden in Ethiopia, faith-based discoveries are once again dominating conversations. But it wasn't until divers returned to the same stretch of the Red Sea that Ron Wyatt once explored that something truly shifted. Suddenly, people who hadn't opened a Bible in years were tuning into live streams, scrolling through religious TikToks, and watching preachers call it a sign. Across the U.S., Christian influencers jumped on the news, declaring that these findings were evidence of biblical prophecy. One popular pastor, speaking to thousands online, said this was the moment believers had been waiting for. He believed that what was hidden for centuries was now being revealed, and not by chance. Back in Wyatt's time, exploration meant basic scuba gear, shaky handheld cameras, and long, expensive trips guided mostly by instinct and faith. He had no drones, no sonar maps, and no advanced imaging to back him up. Most of what he recorded lived in grainy photos and passionate interviews. Today's divers are working with tools that would have been science fiction to him. They use high-definition underwater drones, sonar that scans the ocean floor in layers, and AI systems that can filter out natural coral patterns from potential man-made shapes. Even satellites now assist in mapping the seabed. What once took months of hopeful diving can now be narrowed down in hours. This leap in technology hasn't just made things faster, it's made them believable. Now, salvage teams aren't made up of hobbyists with camcorders. They include retired Navy personnel, engineers, and private researchers with funding from investors and faith-based organizations. Some teams have corporate backing. Others are on a mission rooted in religious conviction. Together, they're equipped to prove what Wyatt could only suggest. And they did go back to the exact coordinates Wyatt marked over 40 years ago. According to his claims, that was the spot where Egyptian chariot wheels had been trapped beneath the Red Sea.
There are situations where you see something that looks like an axle, a hub, something that looks like a wheel.
These wheels, he said, had belonged to the army that chased Moses during the Exodus. With their new technology, the divers located what looked like wheel-shaped coral formations. Using metal detectors, they scanned the areas around the raised hubs. Metal was found just where one would expect the center of an Egyptian chariot wheel to be. It wasn't a loose claim anymore. It was a pattern. Egyptian chariots were known to have metal hubs in the center, and the divers believed the coral had preserved that original structure. The shapes weren't scattered randomly. They followed what looked like a deliberate path across the seabed, almost like a trail left behind in a hurry. To some, this feels less like a rediscovery and more like a sign. They believe these artifacts remained hidden until the right tools, and perhaps the right people, were ready to find them. Others argue that the excitement is overblown, that without proper authentication, the claims remain speculative. But that hasn't stopped the footage from spreading. Clips from the dive showing coral shapes that look like wheels are already being shared by pastors, archaeologists, and amateur historians alike. Wyatt's original claims, once brushed off as fantasy, are now being re-examined with serious attention. And all of this brings back a question that was once dismissed. What if he was right? What if the sea did bury an ancient army, and now, piece by piece, the ocean is giving them back? For decades, Ron Wyatt's claims were brushed aside, labeled as fantasy by archaeologists and skeptics alike. His story of finding Egyptian chariot parts beneath the Red Sea was treated more like folklore than fact. But now, with clearer footage and stronger tools, something deeper has come to light, something he may have been right about all along. As the new team of divers dropped beneath the surface, they weren't expecting much more than a few vague shapes, but almost immediately, strange structures began to form in front of them. Sharp, symmetrical edges peeked out from thick coral, and the shapes didn't look random. They looked like wheels. They got closer. The outlines became clearer. There were 3 of them, round, almost perfectly shaped coral-covered objects with defined edges that mirrored the design of ancient Egyptian chariot wheels. The coral had masked them for years, but the form beneath was still intact. The divers recorded everything. Their cameras captured the soft shimmer on one of the wheels, a dull glow that stood out from the coral. It wasn't bright, but it was there. A gold-like reflection hinted at metal that had somehow survived centuries beneath the sea. Though worn and corroded, the surface of the wheel was still visible. It was too well preserved to ignore. This wasn't just another lost relic. This could be something that challenges everything modern archaeologists believe to be fiction. And the further they swam, the more they found. The sea starts to speak. It started small, just the wheels. But then came the other pieces, shards of metal, bone fragments, even parts that looked like they came from horses. Some of the remains were long and narrow, maybe part of wooden frames. Others were jagged and rusted, possibly weapons. And then came the silence from the divers. The camera feed kept rolling, and with each new shape revealed in the sand, the mood shifted. One of the divers broke the silence, saying quietly through the radio that something didn't feel right. What started as a search for history had turned into something else. Then came the moment no one could explain away. A skull appeared on the sonar footage, partially buried, tangled in seagrass. The crew retrieved it, and later testing revealed something unexpected. The bone structure matched an ancient Egyptian horse breed, one that had been used exclusively by the Royal Chariot Division. It was the first real connection to the past that couldn't be ignored. But the next discovery shook the entire crew. A voice crackled through the diver's headset again, repeating the words from earlier, but this time louder, clearer. He said something was very wrong. At first, the team assumed there was a problem with the gear, but when the feed from his helmet camera came through, they saw why his tone had changed. Bones, human ones, were everywhere, hundreds of them. Skulls, ribs, vertebrae, all scattered across the sea floor, wrapped in what looked like the remains of spears, torn fabrics, and wooden debris. It wasn't just a single chariot. It looked like an entire army had fallen right there, frozen beneath the surface. And suddenly, it wasn't just about Wyatt anymore. It wasn't even just about the Exodus. This was something far bigger. Something that, if true, meant the stories dismissed as legend might have always been based on something real. For decades, Ron Wyatt's name carried more doubt than credibility. His findings were written off as wild guesses, and his lack of formal training made it easy for experts to ignore him. But after divers followed the exact coordinates he once marked, things changed. What they found wasn't myth, it was physical. And now people are wondering what else he might have been right about. The sudden attention has sparked renewed interest in Wyatt's old research. Even the skeptical archaeologists, the ones who once rolled their eyes at his claims, are revisiting his original notes. His credentials may not have held up, but the location he identified just did. That's not something anyone can ignore anymore. Modern archaeology has a habit of controlling its narrative. Information is filtered, curated, and often locked behind academic walls. And when it comes to stories that sound too biblical or too strange, they rarely make it past the first review.
Moses once stood here with the children of Israel, and the water was opened before them by the hand of God. An amazing testimony of truth.
But when divers pulled up that footage, from coral-covered chariot wheels to bones buried in the sea floor, something broke through that silence. The footage didn't come with official labels or scholarly footnotes, but it spoke for itself. In the absence of a formal response from the scientific community, the footage kept spreading. Was it groundbreaking proof or a carefully crafted illusion? No one could say for certain, but either way, it had people talking. Suddenly, the story of the Exodus wasn't just being preached from pulpits. It was being debated in labs and classrooms. Wyatt's work is still echoing. Ron Wyatt was never taken seriously by the mainstream scientific community, but it wasn't because he lacked commitment. He believed every ancient story in the Bible was rooted in truth, just waiting to be found. His goal was never fame or recognition. He simply wanted to protect what he thought were physical pieces of sacred history. Years later, others are following his trail, this time with stronger tools and a broader reach. The debate over Mount Sinai's true location has been going on for decades. The mountain in Saudi Arabia, once dismissed, is now seeing a surge of attention. Teams are returning to the site, but not with guesswork or simple tools. Now, they're using drone footage, satellite imaging, and 3D surface mapping to investigate the area more deeply than ever before. In Turkey, another theory is gaining new traction. Some researchers believe Noah's Ark didn't disappear. It fossilized. They say it's still sitting in stone form, halfway buried in a remote hillside. Expeditions have started again, aiming to study the site with updated equipment. And then there's the Dead Sea. Rumors of new scrolls buried in hidden caves have drawn archaeologists and explorers back to the Judean wilderness. The idea that more ancient writings might still be untouched has sparked a wave of excitement among biblical researchers. The search for lost history is no longer just about hiking and digging. Artificial intelligence is now part of the hunt. These systems are scanning everything from underwater ridges to closed-off burial chambers, looking for unusual shapes and signs of man-made structures. They find what the eye can't. AI is detecting patterns in data that would take humans decades to uncover. We're stepping into an era where technology is not just helping science, it's reshaping it. The line between archaeology and computer science is blurring. Some teams are even using machine learning to reconstruct what damaged scrolls or destroyed architecture may have originally looked like. Every scan, every detection is a possible clue to rewriting what we know. All of this raises new questions about what we've accepted as truth. Maybe the timeline of history isn't as fixed as we thought. Maybe some stories that were once labeled as legends actually happened, just in ways we don't fully understand yet. What we're seeing is not just a challenge to archaeology or science, it's a challenge to how we define knowledge itself. The past may not be buried. It might just be waiting, hidden in caves, resting under coral, or stored in lines of ancient code, slowly being read for the first time. And now, with all this evidence rising from the depths, both land and sea, it feels like we're standing at the edge of something much bigger than we expected. What do you think? Could we be on the verge of rewriting history? Could legends from ancient texts actually turn out to be real events backed by physical proof? Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. See you in the next video.